Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill taking an early look at the next week's slate. Georgia heading on the road to play Kentucky. And I think a lot of SEC fans who had watched Kentucky play South Carolina on Saturday afternoon, the biggest question mark you have in this football game is how does Kentucky keep Brock Vandagriff upright against this Georgia program? You look at South Carolina, I think their pass rush is actually pretty dang good this year. You take a look at true freshman Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard. They're getting after it. Well, let's just be quite frank about it, though. This Georgia pass rush is going to be a little bit different. I think Glenn Schumann is going to have a lot of things schemed up. At the end of the day, that's kind of where this game gets decided. If Kentucky wants to have a chance in this football game, you have to give Brock Vandagriff an opportunity to be a difference maker at quarterback, which I think Georgia fans know he can be. But if he is getting the amount of pressure that he saw against South Carolina, against Georgia, it's going to be a long night for Kentucky. So they got to figure that out. And Dill, this Georgia defense, we said it after the game against Clemson. I feel even good about saying it. This Georgia defense might be special. And we kind of said it. It kind of reminds you of the 2021 defense. I didn't want to kind of fully lean into that take until we saw a little bit more. But after seeing what Clemson just did against App State, putting up 66 points, I feel pretty damn good about kind of putting the label for this Georgia defense as potentially a special unit in 2024. Going to get into some key matchups, some key players to look at. Now, before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And more importantly, let it fly in the comment section. Best part about doing these game predictions, these game previews, hearing from you guys, chopping it up about ball. So again, let it fly in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, let's start with that matchup. This Kentucky offense going up against the Georgia defense that I think is probably watching film right now and licking their chops. How we feel about this matchup?
I mean, that's where it gets out of hand, obviously. And
yes,
frankly, I mean, the disappointing part about what they were doing in pass protection is they were running the ball well. I mean, you look, Demi is running the ball well. That's a good stat line, 25 for about $130. You can win playing that type of football. But again, they got themselves so one-dimensional by the end of that game because South Carolina pretty much knew, well, if they drop back, we're getting home and we're going to get a sack and we're going to get turnovers. And that's pretty much what they were doing. So somehow Kentucky's going to need to figure out a way to be two-dimensional because there's just no chance that you can play this Georgia team and move the ball at all if you can't do both. And the disappointing part, again, is they have the wide receivers, I think, to do it. I love Barian Brown and Dane Key. Those are two guys who can hit big explosive plays and make things happen through the air. But again, if something doesn't change drastically about what their tackles are going to do, I think, they faced a good edge room in South Carolina. It doesn't really compare, I don't think, to Georgia right now. I don't really see how Kentucky establishes anything on offense that resembles.
Well, that's probably the problem when you're looking at this game is Kentucky found some sort of rhythm on offense yesterday afternoon by running the football right at South Carolina. Hey, we're going to take the pass rush right out of this thing. We're going to run the football. They had some success. Well, guess what? Running the football right at Georgia is not very easy to do, right? And I think you look at Kentucky and say, how can we start getting some momentum and some rhythm against this Georgia defense? This goes back to why you think the Georgia defense is so special. How do you do it? Like, you can't really run right at them, but you want to kind of get the quick game going and get out to the perimeter. You got linebackers and Raylan Wilson and CJ Allen and probably 7 other names I could list that are all like sub-11 guys. Kirby Smart just recruits absolute burners at the linebacker position. So you want to get to the perimeter. Well, good luck doing that with the amount of rowdies.
And on top of that, having really good linebackers who are stretching the field. I mean, you look, Allen, Raylan Wilson, like they're just getting more athletic. They're getting sideline even better than what they were doing last year. But if they can't somehow get that secondary back and keep those safeties from just screaming downhill, I mean, you look at what Malachi Starks does when he can sniff runs out. I mean, he is such a weapon. He covers so much ground. He's such a good tackler. So if they can't get those safeties and corners at least respecting their ability to throw the ball and keep them off the line a little bit, again, can you get that perimeter game going at all if corners and safeties can key on it and just come screaming downhill consistently? And that comes back to, can they protect long enough to get some sort of downfield passing game going? Because if they can't, it goes back. It all kind of comes together. If they can't get the ball down the field, what is your answer to the Georgia?
Is this the game that Jalen Walker really breaks out? I would argue that he broke out last year, and I would argue that he broke out against Clemson as well. But I feel like there's not a ton of national media hype around him. I think there's a lot of hype around the Rock Boys community and around the Georgia community. I don't think there's a lot of hype about Jalen Walker anywhere else. This is a primetime game, 7:30 on ABC. Jalen Walker goes for 2 or 3 sacks and starts getting a little bit more recognition of, and you got a couple guys that could do this, right? Everybody knows Mikael Williams, but you got Jalen Walker, you got Damon Wilson, you got absolute dudes who I think Glenn Schumann is just going to scheme up, man. Like, I think Glenn Schumann is going to get really creative in terms of how we are rushing the passer. Because, again, Kentucky not only struggled with those individual one-on-one matchups, but they struggled picking up the stunts. They struggled picking up the blitzes. I think Glenn Schumann in this pass rush unit really licking their chops. It's going to be really, again, it's hard to find an avenue with how Kentucky looked on Saturday for this unit to be moving the football against the Georgia defense that I'm just going to double down and say I think it's a special unit. It reminds me of 2021. Let's flip to the offensive side of the football. I think this Kentucky defense is pretty damn good. I don't think the 31 points against South Carolina is even close to reflective of how good this unit is. They were put in horrible position after horrible position. That being said, my big question is you look at one of the things that Kentucky does, especially going back to 2023 to really disrupt offenses, was a guy like Deion Walker, who had the ability to really just wreck games for opposing offenses in 2023. Can he do that against Tate Ratledge and company on the inside? Georgia is one of those few offensive lines that, at least in my opinion, I trust against a guy like Deion Walker. That's given a lot of credit to Deion Walker because he's a great football player. Georgia has one of the more, I wouldn't say experienced because they're replacing guys like Cedric Van Pran, but everything you're hearing out of fall camp is that interior offensive line is damn good. We've seen that the first 2 games. Can Deion Walker take over this game or at least be a disruptive presence is probably something you're looking at if you're kind of a Kentucky fan looking to get some momentum in this football game.
Because that probably would be Kentucky's avenue on defense to like really kind of shutting down Georgia in the way I think they'd have to, given that I don't think Georgia or Kentucky's going to score a whole lot in this game. And I think you're right. At the end of the day, I don't think we've ever seen a defensive line really take Georgia out of the game in the Kirby Smart era.
No.
I mean, it's the way he built, he recruits, they develop, they're so physical, they're so sound. And again, they can also do everything. Now
this is coming from a Michigan fan real quick. We won back-to-back Joe Moore Awards, and then Washington won it. The fact that Georgia hasn't won one in the last 3 years is, yeah, I'm a Michigan fan, but you look at the Georgia offensive lines, they've been some of, if not the best unit in the country over the last couple of years. I think it's crazy. You're right. This Georgia offensive line, I think, can handle what Kentucky brings in the front seven. And I think my question for Kentucky outside of that, and sorry I cut you off here, was Kentucky's got some real bright spots, right? You look at Deion Walker, you look at a guy like Dumas Johnson, you have a couple guys in the back end that I really, really do like as NFL-type dudes. Do they have enough of them to deal with the amount of bullets that Georgia has on offense? And that it kind of conversation that we had preseason and post-Clemson game, which is, all right, Georgia needs to replace guys like Ladd and Brock Bowers. They're not going to do it with just another Brock Bowers or another Ladd. They're going to do it by a committee. And there are so many different playmakers and pass catchers within this Georgia offense. My question is, does Kentucky have enough guys on the defensive side of the football to deal with all the different kind of playmakers that Georgia has on offense?
Yeah, and that is the fundamental problem with Georgia right now. I mean, just looking at how many ways they can beat you on offense, it's probably at least as many, if not more, than what we've seen in this Georgia era.
I think it's way more. Like, you go back to last year.
I look at the boundary wideouts. That's where it gets different. I mean, some of those plays they made against Clemson, whether it was Arian Smith, whether it was London Humphreys, I mean, to be able to catch and run that way and make those type of plays, that was something that I don't think you always had with Georgia. And they could always pound you into the ground. They could always use their tight ends to be consistent and keep themselves on schedule and just march on teams methodically. But again, their ability to explode on teams, and when they wanted to start doing that against Clemson, yeah, they were kind of had a bit of a rock fight, obviously, in that first half. But once they were like, all right, we're going to open this up and try to get our playmakers involved, those guys came through. Arian Smith feels like, to me, he's that guy I was like, and I probably said this before, he was like that guy I feel like he's coming. And then it was like years and years of that, and it never really happened. I mean, this year, the way they're starting to use him, I love that they're getting him on the perimeter, carrying the ball, whether it's through end arounds or it's through screens, and then his still ability, obviously, to get downfield. I think him and London Humphreys have provided such a spark or such a unique like kind of twist into this Georgia offense that, again, kind of what you said, just how exactly do you stop them unless you're equally as deep and talented? And I'm not sure Kentucky has that across the board. And you said it. They have their guys. They have their Deion Walkers. They have their Dumas Johnson or Jackson. Like, those guys are legit very good players, but I'm just not sure they have all 11 who can kind of do that with Georgia.
Yeah, Mike Bobo has done. So I think Mike Bobo. I know Georgia fans were pissed at the play calling in the first half. The second half adjustments you saw that he threw in against Clemson, incredible. I mean, he just was absolutely in his bag for 30 minutes of football. And I think there's going to be opportunities for Mike Bobo to get in his bag again against Kentucky. I think he's going to get in his bag. Dill, let's get to the pick here. 21.5 points. I'll start. I'm going to take Georgia. One, I look at Kentucky yesterday. I just, there's not a lot of confidence in me taking Kentucky to cover these points. But I think more importantly, 21.5 points, it's a lot for a historically very solid Kentucky football team at home. That being said, with what we just saw from Kentucky's offense in terms of putting the ball in harm's way, not having good field position, I think Georgia has a very good chance at really getting some defensive scores, but more importantly, giving Carson Beck a lot of time of possession and a lot of short fields. We kind of saw this against Clemson. If you routinely just give Carson Beck in this offense a lot of chances and you give them a lot of time on the football field, they are going to break through and kind of pour it on. I think Georgia's going to pour it on here.
Yeah, I think it's Georgia too. And I kind of look at the way I think Kentucky's going to have to play it is they're going to have to ask Brock Vandagriff to do a lot. And if they don't hit a couple big plays, this game doesn't feel like it's going to be at all close. And so far, frankly, in this year, even in that Southern Miss game, and Brock Vandagriff made some good throws against Southern Miss, but he also made some really poor throws and throwing in the traffic, putting the ball in harm's way. Obviously, against Kentucky, is consistently in harm's way. They're going to have to throw the ball, and so far from what we've seen from Vandagriff is he can't be asked to do that every play because I
think Brock, like if they can protect Brock, I think Brock can be a gamer. Like I really do, but like you said,
I think the run game needs to complement it because so far in his like 2 games, I think the ball has been in harm's way too much.
I get that, and he's going to have to play some hero ball if Kentucky wants to win. And if he's playing hero ball, Georgia's going to have some opportunities to get some hands on footballs. I think that's probably what you're looking at here. Give both the boys, Georgia, and the points. We'll cut it out here. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.